It was not in our reading for this morning, but Jesus once said, "Whoever wishes to save his or her life will lose it. And conversely, whoever might give up his or her life for me will find it." You know, it's no wonder with teaching like that so many find Jesus either impossible to understand or undesirable to follow. I think most of us spend a good bit of our time and energy and thinking on the subjects of how to preserve our lives, how to lengthen and strengthen them, how to enrich our lives, if not materially, then in other ways that we might be long and happy in our days. And yet here Jesus is telling us as his followers to think differently. He is inviting us to think not about saving our lives, but about giving them up for him. What might it possibly mean to give up our lives for Jesus? And how would we even begin to do so? I think one thing Jesus meant, and one thing that he invited us to do, is with our lives to serve. He said to his audience in the reading which Paul read for us so well just a few moments ago, "The one who is greatest among you will be a servant." Jesus meant by that we are not so much to serve ourselves, but to serve others. This past Tuesday was Halloween, as you may recall, and I was watching some television in the background in the morning as I ate my breakfast. And I wasn't paying a particular attention to the program until I happened to glance over at the screen just for a moment, and I noticed that the broadcaster, the on-air personality, was in a kind of Halloween costume. And his face had been painted very expertly. I think he was some kind of zombie, like a dead body, soulless, walking around. And it was quite an ornate job of makeup and paint that he had on his face. And what was particularly striking about this was that the camera was tuned to this on-air personality as he was sitting in the chair, and as the very skilled makeup artists were touching up his face as they were about to break to the commercial and prepare for the next segment. And I was incredibly surprised to realize that in fact I had never seen anyone applying the makeup to an on-air personality before. And yet here there were 3 expert professionals whose work it was to make their colleague look good. And why is it that we do not see such workers? Those are people who in the context of that workplace and in the effort to put on the broadcast are serving in relative humility and almost total anonymity. We don't show those kinds of people on camera because we celebrate what it is to be served rather than to serve. If we happen to be in a restaurant, we would rather be those who are sitting down to enjoy a delicious meal than to be those who are waiting on the tables. If we happen to be staying in a hotel. We are much happier to be the guests of honor than to be those who are changing the bed sheets and scrubbing the floors. Even in the practice of our faith, so often we wish to be those who are served rather than those who serve. And Jesus has invited us to reverse our expectations, to flip our way of thinking. I think another thing that Jesus meant when he invited us to give up our lives for him is to sacrifice. To sacrifice is to give something up. Service is a wonderful thing, but sometimes we can rightly do things which are in service to ourselves. Sometimes we can be enriched by our service. You know, if we were in business and we provided excellent customer service, as well we should, we would be gaining by way of that service. And service is a good thing, and we should look to do it, but there is something more, and that is sacrifice. Sacrifice is when we give something up, even when we suffer some kind of loss. Today is Remembrance Sunday, that Sunday of the year before Remembrance Day, November 11th, when we remember those soldiers who went to war in an incredibly important time and effort. We remember in particular those who suffered loss and who died on the battlefield. All of those who joined up served. But among those who served, some paid a particular sacrifice through great injury to their bodies or to their minds, or perhaps even in the laying down of their lives. Sacrifice is not so much something that we choose, but that's something, when called upon, we might accept. When I was in university, I had a Christian friend, and his family were immigrants to Canada. And he was very fond of telling the story of his father's great sacrifice for him and for their entire family. As newcomers to Canada, they had to start from the very bottom, and they came here with little more than the shirts on their back, and the father had to work incredibly hard in order for the family to make ends meet and to have opportunities in this new land. And my friend was so fond of telling the story how his dad had to work the night shift. And he had to work very long hours to support the family. And his dad would get home in the morning after the end of a long shift, and then he would help him and his brothers and sisters get ready for school. And then their dad would get in the car and drive them to school and make sure they got to class. And on the side of the road, after the bell had rung, the dad would have a nap because he was so exhausted. And throughout their growing up years, their father made great sacrifices for them. A few years ago, I read a wonderful little book that asked the question, was Christ's death a sacrifice? And the scholar answered in this wonderful little volume that the death of Jesus was not a sacrifice in the traditional religious sense that we might come to expect. Rather, it was a sacrifice in that when called upon, Jesus gave up willingly his life and all the experiences and opportunities which might otherwise have come had he chosen a different course. And so one thing it means for us to give up our lives for him is that we sacrifice. And can we follow Jesus there, I wonder? I think perhaps yet a third thing that it means when Jesus invited us to give up our lives for him is that in our service and in our sacrifice, we might do all of it in secret. If you listened carefully to the words that Paul read a few minutes ago, you would have noticed that most of that section of Matthew's gospel was taken up with some critiques of Jesus against the religious leaders of his day. He said that their leadership consisted mostly of public show. Oh, they liked to pray, but they liked to pray in particular long prayers and public prayers so that people could hear how pious and faithful they were. They liked to wear fancy, expensive garments which showed everyone how important they were. They liked to have places of honor so that their service could be recognized. Jesus said these are good things to do. We ought to be faithful to God, but we ought to do so in secret. If it means that we are seeking not the honor and recognition of other people, but rather the honor and recognition of God. And you see, when we are willing and able to do what it is that God wants us to do it, even in secret, when there is no possible recognition, what we are saying with our hearts and with our actions is that we are doing it for God. And if there is to be any reward, we are leaving it over to God to give it. There are some things that is easy to do in secret. It is easy to be rich and successful and comfortable in secret. In fact, privacy can make some of those blessings more enjoyable. I remember some years ago reading about a Hollywood actor who was in some very successful films, and then for some years I did not see his name in any movie promotions, and I learned that he had left show business and went off to live a relatively normal life in relative anonymity. Well, I would say that kind of situation sounds very desirable to most of us. I dare say it sounds very desirable to the celebrities with whom he once hobnobbed. It's wonderful to be able to enjoy the fruits of one's labors in privacy. is relatively difficult to serve and to sacrifice in secret, when there is nobody to see our trials and our sufferings. What good is it, we might wonder? What is being accomplished? What is being accomplished is that we are learning to trust in God and to give any possible reward over to the Almighty, our Maker, Redeemer, and friend. Some of you will remember the famous musical, and if not the musical, then certainly the title track, Fame. The chorus of the well-known song says, "Remember my name, fame, I'm going to live forever." Fame is how our culture seeks immortality. If people know who we are, then maybe they will remember us after we're gone. And so people in our day and age seek fame and notoriety, even in shocking and offensive ways. Friends, this is not how we gain life. We gain life not by seeking it, not by trying to preserve, strengthen, or enrich it. All of these things will pass away. We gain life, both now and forever, by giving it over to Jesus. To him be all praise and glory. Amen.